Christ-like life. Well, if you're all trying to do the same thing, does it matter what you call that thing you're striving for? Does it matter whether you're calling it God, or Allah, or Buddha, or just a better way of life? Does it really matter what you call it if the path that you're on is making you the best person that you can be? I'm not sure that I can answer that in the negative. The other thing that I want to point out about this is that words themselves are open to interpretation. So when we say that we're on a path to the supreme God, what does that mean? How do we know what that means? Now, Dr. Miles says that, well, there is one supreme God, and he's laid out what we're supposed to do. Isn't it possible that that supreme God also laid out a different path for different people? Why is it that there is only one path? Why can't God have written multiple texts to make sure that multiple people in multiple contexts get to know him? I'm not sure that I can answer that question either. Now let me provide an analogy for you. And this is actually, I've learned recently, an oft-used analogy for finding God. Let's say that there's a mountain. There are a variety of ways to get up that mountain. You can try the switchback path, you can do the roundabout path, you can do the rock face up. Why, you can even orienteer without a path. And in fact, what you're trying to reach could be different. I mean, you could try to get to the crest, the apex, the pinnacle, the ridge, the spire, the peak, the mountaintop. There's all different things that you can call it what you get up there. So does it really matter if I'm taking the switchback path and I call it the mountaintop, but somebody else who's going up the rock face calls it the peak? We're still getting to the same place. Now, it may not be the exact same place on top. And as you suggested, there are different ways or there are different parts to knowing God. Well, it's possible that you can try a variety of paths and see different parts of the mountaintop. So if we accept this view, then we understand that there are different ways to get there. Further, we understand that some paths aren't necessarily the tried and true established paths. Now, I asked a friend of mine who converted to Catholicism a little over 10 years ago why she did it. And she said that she was doing it because she was at a point in her life, she grew up in a non-religious household, and she was searching for something more. And in searching for that, she found in religion what she was looking for. And she found Catholicism, and that was where she was most comfortable, and that's what made most sense to her. And I asked her if, before she decided to look for religion, if she thought she was a spiritual, religious person, if she believed in God. And she said, well, yeah, absolutely. And she tried to be a good person, she just didn't have the guide to do it. And then when she went to Catholicism, she found the traditions, the rituals that helped her further along on that path. So, if we accept this perspective, we have to understand that whatever you call it, if we're all trying to get to the same place, it doesn't really matter. And for some people, what may make sense to them, to these thinking, sentient human beings who are given free will, is to follow this path, the Christian path. Whether that's Catholic or Mormon or Baptist or whatever. But you're following the path to God through this path. But if I'm born in a Muslim country, the tradition that I'm going to have is going to lead me to the same God, but through a different path. And I just believe that God, knowing that words are fallible, knowing that we grow up in different cultures, enable us to be able to use different paths to get to him. Now, St. Augustine, who actually was a teacher of rhetoric before he became a saint, He actually was really not very saintly before he found Catholicism. But he discovered, or discovered isn't the right word, but thought up the preacher's dilemma. And what the preacher's dilemma basically says is that God is infinite. Words are finite. Therefore, words are inadequate to describe God. Well, think about that. These scriptures, these texts, all of these things that we use to describe God are really inadequate because they're word-based. If that's the case, isn't it possible that there are a variety of ways to describe this God, this supreme being? Now, two of the criticisms of this perspective are, first, that it's the lazy way, and secondly, that it requires multiple realities. Let's talk about the first. It's the lazy way. It's the easy way. You know, you grow up in a tradition and you don't have to seek anything out. You know, it's what works for you. You know, this perspective of multiple, let's all get along, hold hands, sing kumbaya, everybody gets to do what they want to do, and life is grand. Well, that's not necessarily what this perspective is about. These paths are not necessarily easy paths. And in fact, they're sometimes difficult paths. It's difficult being a Muslim in the United States. Likewise, it's difficult being a Catholic in Northern Ireland. So these paths aren't easy paths, whichever path it is. And it's not lazy to suggest that what works for you won't work for me on my quest to find God. Further, it's not necessarily lazy to suggest that your cultural traditions make this path to God the best path for you and the people around you. The second criticism is kind of more up my alley. Because it talks about the fact that if there is the truth, capital T truth, then you can't have another capital T truth over here. Because that would require multiple realities. Well, again, right up my alley. Because words create reality. That's what rhetoric is all about, how your words create your reality. We can talk about a variety of theorists who suggest this. For example, Pico della Mirandola. He was a Renaissance writer. He believed that words create your reality, and it's just like magic. Now, the way that the words that you paint things really reflect how you view things. I always use this example to my students in class. When a student comes up to me and says, I don't understand why you gave me this grade, that tells me one thing. If a student comes up to me and says, I'd like to really understand why I earned this grade, that tells me a totally different thing. So this reality is how we produce it. You know, how we structure it. So if we look to Kenneth Burke says that he's a linguist, says that we are the simple using, misusing, and abusing animal. So we use words in ways that they're intended and ways that they're not intended. We can hurt people, we can help people with words. And certainly religion has been used as the word to start tons of wars, or at least the name of the religion. I find very few religions that say, yeah, we should all go to war, yay! Instead, we use the name of religion. We use the word religion to justify war. I think it's important for us to recognize that we are human. And as humans, we are subject to the tools that we have. Tools that God gave us, and further, tools that God can manipulate as he sees fit. And further, maybe he has more tools than we have. So, if we think about that, that leaves us with a couple of implications. And I'd suggest that there are two implications, one for the individual and one for the world writ large. First, for the individual. You know, you've got all these religions out there saying, they're the true one, they're the true one, they're the true one. How are you supposed to know? Like, you could spend a lifetime just trying to figure out which one's the true one. You know, and I know that the Bible warns us against false prophets. But if they're trying to make you a good person, then, again, I go back to the language. What does it matter what you call it? Further, for the individual, it allows us the space to grow in one path, rather than worrying about whether we're on the right path. For the world, I think the implications are obvious. You know, you talk about the pluralistic perspective, and we have to respect diversity. What's wrong with that? I mean, what's wrong with me saying, hey, you're Muslim, good for you. Are you on the right path? Are you on the right path to being a good person? And Muslims, the whole point is that when you get to heaven, that you've done more good than you've done bad. I mean, that's a whole point, but it's a big point. If each religion is trying to make you the best person that you can be, then as a world, if we start to respect this diversity and respect the notion that, you know, people can find God, can find their way to being the best person that they can be in a variety of paths, we might just respect each other a little bit more. These wars fought in the name of religion, well, maybe they'd recede a little bit. Instead of us fighting to say, my religion's better, and therefore we should get this property and these water rights, maybe we would say, hey, you're on the path to God too, you're trying to be a good person, you're trying to treat others with respect, maybe I should treat you with respect too. Hey, let's share. Let's hold hands, let's sing Kumbaya. Like, would that be such a bad thing? I'm not so certain that it is. To conclude, in the beginning I talked about these religious texts that focus on the Word. It may be possible that if there is one divine writer who's just writing these different texts for different groups of people, maybe he is setting us up for the idea that things are open for interpretation, because we're basing it on words, and words are necessarily interpreted. Thank you.